Lieutenant Jack Reeves never intended to be humanity's first ambassador to the galactic community. He was just a pilot on a routine mission to Mars when his experimental warp engine malfunctioned. One moment he was passing the moon's orbit, the next moment a flash of blue light filled his cockpit, and his small craft was suddenly somewhere else, somewhere very far from home. Jack blinked as alarms blared around him. His ship's computer was going crazy, showing readings that made no sense. According to the navigation system, he wasn't anywhere near Earth or Mars. He wasn't even in the solar system. "Computer, where are we?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Years of flight training had prepared him for emergencies, though nothing quite like this. "Unknown location," the computer replied. "No match with known star charts." Jack looked out the viewport and saw a massive space station. It was unlike anything humans had ever built, a huge ring structure with spokes connecting to a central hub. Around it floated ships of various designs, all of them strange to Jack's eyes. "Well, that's not good," he muttered to himself. His ship was drifting toward the station, pulled by some kind of tractor beam. Jack tried the engines, but they were offline after the warp malfunction. All he could do was watch as his craft was guided toward what appeared to be a docking bay. The radio crackled with an unfamiliar sound, a series of clicks and whistles that made no sense to human ears. Then, surprisingly, it shifted to heavily accented English. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space during a Galactic Council session. Identify yourself immediately." Jack cleared his throat. "This is Lieutenant Jack Reeves of Earth. I seem to be a bit lost. My experimental drive malfunctioned." There was a long pause before the voice returned. "Earth is not a recognized council world. Please stand by for boarding and inspection." As his ship was pulled into the docking bay, Jack could see beings moving, about behind a large window. They weren't human. Some had too many limbs, others had skin colors impossible for humans. Jack felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. He was about to become the first human to meet aliens, and he hadn't even brushed his teeth that morning. His ship settled onto the deck with a gentle thud. Jack checked his sidearm, standard issue for test pilots, but decided to leave it behind. Starting a fight when outnumbered by unknown aliens seemed like a bad idea. The airlock hissed as pressure equalized. Jack took a deep breath and opened the door. Outside stood three very different beings. One was tall and thin, with blue skin and 4 arms. Another was short and stocky, with what looked like scales instead of skin. The third appeared almost human, except for its entirely silver eyes and 6 fingers on each hand. "I come in peace," Jack said, raising his empty hands. "Sorry about dropping in unannounced, not exactly how I planned to spend my Tuesday." The silver-eyed being stepped forward. "You speak the trade language. Unexpected?" "I'm speaking English," Jack replied. "You're the one speaking my language as far as I can tell." The blue being made a series of clicks to the others. "Universal translator functioning correctly. The species is unknown but uses a language variant in our database." The scaly being approached Jack's ship, examining it with what appeared to be a scanning device. Primitive technology. Metal hull, chemical propulsion backup systems. It paused, focusing on the rear section. "But the warp mechanism, impossible." Jack shrugged. "Like I said, it malfunctioned. It was supposed to get me to Mars a bit faster. Not wherever here is. You are in the central chamber of the Galactic Council," the silver-eyed alien explained. "The most secure and restricted location in charted space. Your arrival has interrupted a meeting of the 17 species." 17 species? Jack whistled. "That's quite a party. Sorry to crash it." The blue alien made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You did nearly crash. Your vessel missed the Zentari diplomatic ship by mere units. Had you collided with it, we would be at war now." Jack paled. That would have been a terrible first impression. "Indeed. I am Coordinator Eliza of the Procyon Confederation. These are Security Officer Grax of the Eldebian Commonwealth and Science Advisor Tzik of the Velian Concord." Jack nodded to each in turn. "Lieutenant Jack Reeves, United States Space Force, Earth. Pleasure to meet you all. despite the circumstances. How did your species achieve warp travel? Zik demanded, still scanning the ship. Your technology is inconsistent with the development pattern. This vessel should not be capable of breaching dimensional barriers. Jack scratched his head. To be honest, I'm just the test pilot. The engineers back home had this theory about folding space using quantum something or other. They thought it might work, so we gave it a shot. All three aliens stared at him. You gave it a shot? Eliza repeated slowly. Without centuries of simulation? Without small-scale testing in controlled environments? We did some simulations, Jack defended. For about 8 months, then we built this prototype. Today was the 5th test flight. He smiled weakly. I guess it worked a little too well. Grax made a rumbling sound deep in his chest. Madness. Pure madness. This species is dangerous. Not dangerous, Jack said quickly. Just, efficient. We like to learn by doing. Eliza's forehands made complex gestures that seemed to be entering commands into an invisible interface. The Council must be informed. A new spacefaring species with unpredictable methodologies poses significant questions. Jack suddenly realized the enormity of what was happening. He wasn't just a lost pilot anymore. He was humanity's first contact with an entire galactic civilization. So, what happens now? He asked. Now, Eliza said, you will be brought before the Council to explain your presence. They will determine if your species is ready for contact or if memory adjustment protocols should be employed. Memory adjustment? Jack didn't like the sound of that. A simple procedure, Tazik explained. You would be returned to your world with no memory of this encounter. Standard protocol for premature contact situations. Jack straightened his uniform. With all due respect, I'd prefer to remember this, and I think Earth would benefit from knowing we're not alone. The three aliens exchanged looks. Finally, Eliza nodded. The Council will decide. Come with us, Lieutenant Reeves of Earth. History awaits. As Jack followed his alien escorts down a corridor of materials he couldn't identify, toward a meeting that would change humanity forever, one thought kept running through his mind. No one back home was ever going to believe this. Unless, of course, he managed to convince these aliens to give Earth a chance at joining their galactic community. Somehow he needed to show them that humans, despite their unorthodox methods, had something valuable to offer the stars. Jack took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. He might be an accidental ambassador, but he was determined not to be humanity's last. 6 months had passed since Lieutenant Jack Reeves accidentally warped his ship into the middle of a galactic council meeting. Earth was still reeling from the news that they were not alone in the universe. Governments around the world had joined, together faster than anyone thought possible. The United Earth Space Agency was formed, and Ambassador Greg Lawson was chosen to represent humanity. Greg was not a typical diplomat. Before this assignment, he had been a college football coach. Known for his straight-talking approach, the world leaders decided that traditional diplomats might be too cautious. They needed someone who could think on their feet and speak plainly. Greg was that person. The Galactic Council had granted Earth provisional diplomatic status. A small embassy was set up on Centauri Prime, the neutral meeting ground for the galaxy's powers. Greg and his team had been living there for 3 months now. I'm tired of this, Greg said, pacing around the embassy's main office. His aide, Samantha Wright, watched him with concern. We've been to 15 meetings, and what do we have to show for it? Nothing. They're being cautious, Samantha reminded him. Lieutenant Reeves scared them with how we approach technology. Greg stopped pacing and looked out the window at the alien city. Centauri Prime was beautiful, with tall spires and floating platforms. Ships of all sizes moved through the sky in organized patterns. It was nothing like the crowded airspace of Earth. We need resources, Greg said. That asteroid belt in our system has everything we need to build a proper defense fleet, but they won't give us mining rights. The Aldebians claim they have historic survey rights to that region, Samantha said, checking her tablet. And the Council seems to agree with them. Historic survey rights, Greg repeated with a snort. They flew by it once, 200 years. Ago made a note and never came back. Meanwhile, we have people on Earth who need jobs and we need materials to build ships, Samantha sighed. She understood his frustration. The Aldebian Commonwealth was the most economically powerful bloc in the galaxy. They had been polite, but firm in blocking Earth's requests for mining permits. We have the formal dinner with the Aldebian representatives tonight, she reminded him. Maybe you can make some progress there. Greg nodded, though he didn't look hopeful. Later that evening, Greg and Samantha entered the grand dining hall of the Centauri Prime Diplomatic Center. The room was filled with representatives from various species. The Aldebians were easy to spot, tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 arms and silver eyes. The head of the Aldebian delegation, Trade Minister Kelson, greeted Greg with a formal bow. Ambassador Lawson, we are pleased you could join us. Greg forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Minister. Or should I say, for the galaxy? Kelson's expression didn't change. Humor was not a universal constant, Greg had learned. The dinner proceeded slowly. 17 courses, each representing a member species of the council. Greg tried to be patient, making small talk and following the complex etiquette Samantha had drilled into him. Finally, when dessert was served, Greg broached the subject. Minister Kelson, I wanted to discuss the asteroid belt mining rights again. Kelson dabbed his mouth with a cloth. Yes, we have reviewed your proposal. The Commonwealth believes it would be prudent to conduct further environmental impact studies before any decision is made. More studies? Greg asked, keeping his voice level. How long would that take? A thorough study would require at least 15 more council sessions, Kelson said. Perhaps 9 of your Earth months. Greg felt his patience snap. 9 more months of waiting while Earth's economy struggled and their defenses remained minimal. He stood up, removed his ceremonial drink from the table and handed it to Samantha. Hold my beer, he said. Samantha's eyes widened. She knew what that phrase meant. It was what humans said right before doing something either very brave or very stupid. Ambassador, what are you planning? She whispered urgently. But Greg was already walking away from the table, pulling out his communicator. The Aldebians watched in confusion as he stepped into the corner of the room and began speaking rapidly. Captain Johnson, get the team ready. We're doing Plan B, launch in 30 minutes. He returned to the table and smiled at the confused aliens. Sorry about that. Just needed to make a quick call. Now, where were we? Ah yes, the asteroid belt. I think you'll find our position on that has changed. 3 days later, alarms blared throughout the Centauri Prime Diplomatic Center. The Aldebian delegation stormed into Earth's small embassy with security officer Grax of the Council Guard behind them. This is an outrage, Kelson shouted, all 4 of his hands gesturing wildly. You have violated council law. Greg sat calmly at his desk. What seems to be the problem, Minister? You know very well what the problem is. Your ships are in the disputed asteroid belt. They are mining without permission. Samantha looked at Greg in shock. She knew he had been planning something, but this was bold even for him. Greg shrugged. We submitted our request months ago. The asteroids aren't being used by anyone. Grax stepped forward. Ambassador Lawson, this is a serious breach of protocol. The Council could revoke Earth's provisional status for this. That would be unfortunate, Greg said, especially since we've already extracted more resources in 3 days than the Aldebians plan to harvest in a year. Turns out humans are pretty good at mining. We've been doing it for thousands of years. He activated a display on his desk, showing images of the human mining operation. Small, efficient ships were breaking down asteroids and processing the materials on site. It was impressive, even the aliens had to admit. How did you establish this operation so quickly? Kelson asked, his anger giving way to curiosity. We had the ships ready, Greg explained. We just needed to give the green light. Humans don't like waiting when there's work to be done. Grax rumbled deep in his chest. The Council will not be pleased. The Council can send inspectors to verify we're following all safety protocols, Greg offered. We're not being reckless, just efficient. 3 days later, the Council held an emergency session. Greg stood before the 17 representatives prepared for the worst, but when the head of the Council spoke, it wasn't to announce sanctions. The Council has decided to grant Earth provisional mining rights to the disputed asteroid belt, the ancient Velian announced, with the stipulation that a non-human supervisor will oversee operations to ensure compliance with galactic environmental standards. Greg couldn't believe it. His gamble had worked. As he left the chamber, Samantha caught up with him. "I can't believe you got away with that." Greg smiled. "Sometimes you have to show people what you can do instead of just telling them. The Aldebians respect action, even if they don't approve of our methods." "So what's next?" she asked. "Next," Greg said, "we show the galaxy what humans can really do when given a chance." 2 years had passed since humanity joined the galactic community. Earth ships now traveled between stars, and humans had earned a unique reputation. Other species saw them as brash, unpredictable, and alarmingly creative. They solved problems in ways that shocked the older races, but their solutions often worked. Captain Laura Daniels of the Earth vessel Curiosity was proud of this reputation. Her ship was one of the newest in Earth's growing fleet, designed with both human innovation and alien technology. The crew of 150 was on a mission to visit Earth's first colony on Proxima Centauri b, the closest habitable planet to Earth. "Captain, we're receiving an emergency signal from the colony," said Richard Oakes, Laura's first officer. His face was serious as he looked up from his screen. "Put it through," Laura ordered, straightening in her captain's chair. The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Colony Governor Pat Martinez. The image was fuzzy, with static cutting through every few seconds. "Curiosity, this is Proxima Colony." "We have a serious problem," Martinez said, her voice breaking up. "Our atmospheric processors are failing. The air is becoming toxic. The Council, scientists say we have maybe 2 weeks before we need to evacuate." Laura frowned. The colony was home to 5,000 people. "What happened?" "Something in the planet's upper atmosphere is reacting with our processors. The Council ships are arriving to help with evacuation, but they say it will take at least 3 months to move everyone." "3 months?" Laura repeated, shocked. "You don't have 3 months." "I know," Martinez replied grimly. "The Council races work slowly and carefully. They've been running simulations for days now instead of taking action." Laura turned to her science officer, Emma Ward. "What do we know about Proxima Centauri b's atmosphere?" Emma tapped her screen quickly. "It's thinner than Earth's, with higher levels of nitrogen and trace gases we don't have at home. The colony uses processors to add oxygen and filter out toxins." Laura nodded and turned back to the screen. "Governor, we'll be there in 6 hours. Hold tight." When the transmission ended, Richard looked worried. "Captain, what are you planning?" "The Curiosity isn't equipped to evacuate 5,000 people," Laura smiled. "Who said anything about evacuation?" 6 hours later, the Curiosity entered orbit around Proxima Centauri b. 3 large Council vessels were already there, preparing for the slow evacuation process. The largest belonged to the Velians, masters of atmospheric science for 12,000 years. Laura opened a channel to the Velian ship. "This is Captain Laura Daniels of Earth vessel Curiosity. I'd like to discuss an alternative to evacuation." The Velian commander, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, appeared on screen. "Captain Daniels, I am Chief Scientist Talaran. There is no alternative. The atmospheric degradation cannot be reversed with current technology. My species has studied similar problems for millennia." "With respect, Chief Talaran," Laura replied, "I have an idea I'd like to try before we give up on the colony." Talaran's expression showed doubt. "Your species has been spacefaring for merely 2 years. We have run thousands of simulations on this problem. How many actual attempts have you made to solve it?" Laura asked. There was a pause. "Simulations are safer than experimentation when dealing with a planetary atmosphere." Laura nodded. "I understand caution, but sometimes you need to try something new." She turned to Richard. "Hold my beer." Richard recognized the phrase and sighed. "What are we doing, Captain?" "We're going to modify our ship's waste recyclers to work as atmospheric processors," Laura announced to her crew. "Emma, work with engineering to reconfigure our systems. We can use the shuttle bay as a conversion chamber." For the next 24 hours, the crew of the Curiosity worked frantically. They took apart systems not essential for the ship's survival and rebuilt them into massive processors. The Council ships watched with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Talaran sent multiple messages warning of catastrophic failure. But Laura pressed on. Finally, the makeshift system was ready. "Lower us into the upper atmosphere," Laura ordered. "Begin processor deployment." The Curiosity descended, its hull glowing slightly as it entered the thin atmosphere. Large panels extended from the shuttle bay, releasing a carefully calculated mixture of chemicals designed to bind with the toxic elements and neutralize them. At first, readings showed improvement. The toxin levels decreased by 15%. But after 48 hours, the system began to destabilize. Wind patterns changed unexpectedly, spreading the toxins faster than the processors could clean them. The Council was right, Richard said quietly, looking at the worsening readings. "We need to begin evacuation." Laura stared at the data, her mind racing. "No, the concept is sound. We just need to adjust the delivery method." She turned to Emma. "The problem is distribution. We need to get the neutralizing agents directly into the air currents. That would require manual adjustment of the processors while they're deployed," Emma said. "Outside the ship." Laura nodded. "Exactly. Get me a spacesuit." Richard stood up in alarm. "Captain, you can't be serious. The radiation levels out there are dangerous." "We have 5,000 people counting on us," Laura replied, already heading for the equipment bay. "I'm not giving up." An hour later, Laura was outside the ship, tethered to the hull but floating in Proxima Centauri B's upper atmosphere. Her suit had been hastily modified with extra shielding against radiation, but it wouldn't protect her for long. "The main air current is shifting northeast," Emma's voice said in her earpiece. "You need to adjust the third processor 15 degrees." Laura moved carefully along the hull, reaching the processor panels. The ship shuddered as it fought against the strong winds. She adjusted the panels one by one, following Emma's instructions. "Captain, radiation levels are rising," Richard warned. "You need to come back inside." "Almost done," Laura replied, her breathing heavy. "Just 2 more adjustments." From the Velian ship, Talaran watched in amazement. The human captain was manually adjusting atmospheric processors while suspended in toxic winds. It violated every safety protocol the Velians had, established over thousands of years. "These humans are either brilliant or insane," Talaran said to his crew. "Perhaps both." When Laura finally returned to the ship, she was exhausted but triumphant. The processors were working correctly now, distributing the neutralizing agents directly into the air currents. Over the next 3 days, the toxin levels dropped steadily. By the end of the week, the atmosphere had stabilized. The colony was saved. Talaran requested permission to come aboard the Curiosity. When the Velian chief scientist arrived, he found Laura in the medical bay, being treated for mild radiation exposure. "Your method was unorthodox and dangerous," Talaran said, "but effective. The Velian Science Academy will need to revise several textbooks that have remained unchanged for 6 millennia. Laura smiled weakly. "Sometimes the best solution isn't the safest or most elegant. It's just the one that works." "Indeed," Talaran agreed. "Your species continues to surprise the galaxy. Perhaps there is wisdom in your unorthodox approaches after all." The Zentari were the oldest and most aggressive species in the galaxy. Before the Galactic Council formed, they had conquered hundreds of worlds. Even now, centuries into the peaceful Council era, other species watched them carefully. The Zentari followed Council rules, but everyone knew they were always looking for advantages. Supreme Commander Klovac of the Zentari Defense Force stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastator. His gray-scaled skin reflected the dim blue light of the command center. 6 eyes blinked independently as he studied the display showing Earth's solar system. "These humans continue to surprise the galaxy," Klovac said to his second-in-command. "First, their primitive warp drive, then their mining operations, and now Captain Daniel's solution at Proxima Centauri B. They solve problems in ways we would never consider." "They are dangerous," his officer replied. "Unpredictable, reckless." Klvak nodded. Precisely why they must be contained before they grow stronger. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A border dispute erupted between Earth and a Centauri mining colony near Alpha Centauri. Both claimed rights to a small asteroid field rich in rare elements. The council called for diplomatic talks, but Klvak had other plans. While pretending to negotiate, he secretly ordered his battle fleet to prepare. 30 warships, each capable of destroying an entire planet, gathered at the edge of Centauri space. It would be the largest military force assembled since the Council era began. On Earth, Admiral Diane Foster received the first warnings from their deep space monitoring stations. Centauri ships are moving in formation, reported her executive officer, Kevin Barnes. A lot of them. Diane studied the tactical display in Earth Fleet headquarters. At 39, she was one of the most experienced space commanders humanity had. Before ships could travel between stars, she had commanded the International Space Station. How many? She asked. 30 warships, Kevin replied grimly, including 3 planet killers. Diane felt her stomach tighten. Earth had built 20 ships since joining the galactic community. Most were small, fast vessels designed for exploration or trade. Only 5 were true warships, and even those were centuries behind Centauri technology. Alert all ships, she ordered. I want everyone back in Earth orbit within 6 hours. And contact the Council. The Centauri are violating peace protocols. The Council responded quickly, ordering both Earth and the Centauri to stand down. The Centauri agreed immediately, saying their ships were merely conducting exercises, but the fleet didn't change course. They're still coming, Kevin confirmed after another scan. ETA to Earth orbit is 36 hours. Diane called an emergency meeting with her captains and Earth's top scientists. They gathered in the war room beneath the Rocky Mountains, a facility built during the old Cold War and now repurposed for space defense. We're outgunned, Diane told the somber group. Their technology is far beyond ours. Their shields alone would withstand everything we could throw at them. Could we get help from other Council races? Asked Captain Frank Winters of the Warship Defender. The Council has ordered peacekeepers to the area, but they won't arrive for 3 days, Diane replied. By then, it could be too late. Olivia Martinez, Earth's leading physicist, raised her hand. I've been studying Centauri shield technology. It uses an energy matrix unlike anything we've developed. Can we penetrate it? Diane asked. Not directly, Olivia admitted. But I have a theory. Their shields operate on a specific frequency range. If we could generate a counter-frequency, we might create a resonance effect that would temporarily weaken them. How temporarily? Kevin asked. Maybe 30 seconds, Olivia said. Maybe less. The room fell silent. 30 seconds wasn't long enough to make a difference against 30 warships. We need more time to develop a proper defense, Captain Winters said. Maybe we should. Evacuate key personnel to the Proxima colony. Diane shook her head. We're not abandoning Earth. She turned to Kevin. Get me more data on their shield frequencies. And I want our ships positioned in a defensive formation around Earth. As the meeting broke up, Kevin followed Diane into the hallway. What's the plan, Admiral? Even with perfect positioning, we can't stop them. Diane gave him a small smile. Hold my beer, Kevin. For the next 24 hours, Earth's fleet prepared. But instead of gathering in a tight defensive formation as expected, the ships spread out in what appeared to be a retreating pattern. The Centauri interpreted this as fear. The humans recognized their inferiority, Klvak said, watching Earth's ships scatter. This will be even easier than expected. When the Centauri fleet arrived, the Council mediators were already in Earth orbit, attempting last-minute negotiations. Klvak pretended to listen while positioning his ships for attack. Then, without warning, the Centauri opened fire. Their first volleys destroyed the Council diplomatic vessel, killing all aboard. Next, they targeted Earth's orbital defense platforms. Now, Diane commanded from her flagship, the Defiant. At once, every human ship activated modified communications arrays, each broadcast on a precise frequency that Olivia had calculated. Individually, each signal was harmless, Together, they created a resonance cascade that hit the Zentari shields like a tuning fork, striking the perfect note. For 27 seconds, the Zentari shields flickered. "Launch all missiles," Diane ordered. From Earth's surface and from the human ships, missiles streaked toward the Zentari fleet. They weren't the advanced weapons of the Council races, but simple nuclear missiles with chemical propulsion. The Zentari had long ago moved beyond such primitive weapons and hadn't bothered to defend against them. Explosions blossomed across space as the missiles found their targets. The Zentari ships, their shields down, took heavy damage. 7 were destroyed outright. Another 12 suffered critical systems failures. Kulvak stared in disbelief as his flagship rocked from a direct hit. "Impossible," he roared. "Their technology is too primitive." "Shields are coming back online," his officer reported, "but half the fleet is damaged or destroyed." Kulvak faced a choice: continue the attack with his remaining ships or retreat. Pride demanded he fight on, but logic told him this battle had changed. These humans had done what no species had managed in 2,000 years. They had bloodied the Zentari fleet. "All ships withdraw to safe distance," he ordered finally. "Maintain defensive positions." On the Defiant, Diane's crew cheered as the Zentari pulled back. Their own losses had been heavy, 3 ships destroyed and 2 badly damaged, but Earth still stood. "They're retreating," Kevin confirmed, his voice showing his surprise. "I can't believe it worked." Diane allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the oldest tricks are the best. They were so focused on advanced technology, they forgot the basics of warfare. 3 hours later, a Council peacekeeping fleet arrived. The Zentari were ordered to return to their territory, and an emergency council session was called to address their violation of peace protocols. As Diane prepared to represent Earth at the hearings, Kevin found her in her ready room. The Council. "Representatives want to know how we defeated a Zentari battle fleet with our level of technology," he said. Diane looked up from her desk. "Tell them it's a human tradition. When faced with impossible odds, we get creative." Kevin smiled. "Should I mention the hold my beer part?" "Maybe leave that out for now," Diane replied. "But make sure they understand one thing. Humanity won't be pushed around, not even by the oldest species in the galaxy." The beer incident, as the Council formally called the Earth-Zentari conflict, changed how the galaxy viewed humans. The older species began to see that what had looked like recklessness was actually adaptability. What had seemed like ignorance was actually freedom from old assumptions. 1 year after the conflict, Dr. Alan Scott arrived on Centauri Prime to work at the Galactic Science Academy. At 32, he was one of Earth's leading xenobiologists, specializing in how different species adapted to various environments. The Academy had invited him to join a special research team working on the greatest challenge in interstellar travel: quantum decay. Quantum decay was a problem that had plagued faster-than-light travel since it was first developed millions of years ago. During warp jumps, tiny tears in space-time would form. These tears were too small to be dangerous on their own, but they built up over time, making some travel routes unusable after decades of regular use. Alan's first day at the Academy started with a meeting in a large room with a round table. Scientists from 7 species sat around it, all experts in their fields. At the head of the table sat Teleran, the Velian physicist who had witnessed Captain Laura Daniels save the Proxima Centauri colony. "Welcome, Dr. Scott," Teleran said, gesturing to an empty seat. "We are honored to have an Earth scientist join our team." Alan smiled as he sat down. "The honor is mine. I've read all your published work on quantum decay. 400 years of research is impressive, and yet we have made little progress," Teleran admitted. "The mathematics suggest a solution is possible, but we have not found it." The meeting continued with each scientist explaining their current approach to the problem. Most were focused on complex equations and theoretical models. Alan listened carefully, noting that none of them had tried to directly observe quantum decay in action. "If I may ask," Alan said when they finished, "has anyone actually tried to capture images of the tears as they form?" The room fell silent. Finally, a Zentari scientist spoke. That would be extremely dangerous. Any instrument close enough to observe the tears might be pulled into them. Besides, added a scientist with blue skin and 4 arms, the tears exist, partly in normal space and partly in subspace. No single instrument could observe both aspects. Alan nodded, considering this. On Earth, when we can't observe something directly, we sometimes look for its effects on the surrounding environment, like tracking animal movements by looking at footprints instead of the animals themselves. Talaran's silver eyes widened slightly. An interesting approach. What would you suggest? I'm not sure yet, Alan admitted, but I'd like to try building some detection equipment that could measure the effects of the tears on nearby space. Maybe then we could understand how they form and how to prevent them. Over the next 6 months, Alan worked closely with Talaran. The Velian had lived for over 500 years and had spent most of that time studying theoretical physics. Together, they designed a series of experiments that no one had tried before. Your species approaches problems differently, Talaran observed one day as they worked in the lab. You do not hesitate to try new paths when old ones fail. Alan shrugged. That's because we haven't been around long enough to establish traditions. We make up for our lack of experience with enthusiasm. Their big breakthrough came when they created a device that could detect the gravitational ripples caused by quantum decay. For the first time, scientists could track exactly when and how the tears form during warp jumps. These readings are fascinating, Talaran said, studying the data from their latest test. The tears don't form randomly. They follow a pattern based on the warp field geometry. Alan nodded excitedly. And if they follow a pattern, we might be able to adjust the warp field to prevent them from forming in the first place. They took their findings to the full research team. The other scientists were impressed but cautious. To test this theory, we would need to modify a ship's warp drive and attempt a jump, said the Zentari scientist. If you are wrong, the ship could be lost. I've designed a small probe with a modified warp drive, Alan explained. We can test it remotely. Even so, said the blue 4-armed scientist, the Council requires years of simulations before any practical test of warp technology. Alan looked at Talaran. How long would the simulations take? At least 10 years, Talaran replied. Standard protocol for any experiment involving space-time manipulation. Alan tried to hide his frustration. 10 years of simulations when they could test their theory in a day? He thought about all the travel routes that had been abandoned due to quantum decay, all the colonies cut off from regular contact. What if we ran the test in an isolated area? He suggested. Somewhere any problems would be contained? The other scientists looked uncomfortable, but Talaran seemed thoughtful. There is an empty region near the edge of charted space. If something went wrong there, the damage would be minimal. So we could test our theory safely. Alan pressed. The Council would still require simulations first, the Zentari insisted. Alan sighed and looked at the data again. He was certain their solution would work. The mathematics supported it and the preliminary tests were promising. 10 years of simulations seemed like a waste of time. Sometimes you've got to roll the dice, he said quietly. Talaran recognized the sentiment behind Alan's words. It was the human equivalent of "hold my beer," the phrase that had become famous across the galaxy after the incidents with Ambassador Lawson and Captain Daniels. To everyone's surprise, Talaran said, I agree with Dr. Scott. This solution deserves immediate testing. The other scientists stared in shock. Talaran was one of the most respected physicists in the galaxy, known for careful, methodical research. For him to support such a rapid test was unprecedented. I have observed humans solve problems that my species believed unsolvable, Talaran explained. Their methods are unconventional but effective. I believe Dr. Scott's approach has merit. With Talaran's support, the Council reluctantly approved a limited test. They insisted on evacuating nearby systems as a precaution, but they allowed Alan and Talaran to proceed. On the day of the test, scientists across the galaxy watched as the small probe with its modified warp drive prepared to jump. Alan and Talaran monitored from a safe distance, ready to abort if anything went wrong. Initiating warp sequence, Alan said, activating the remote controls. The probe disappeared in a flash of light. For 10 long seconds, nothing happened. Then it reappeared exactly where it was supposed to, having completed a successful jump through a route previously damaged by quantum decay. The data streamed in, confirming what Alan had hoped. No new tiers had formed. Their modification had worked perfectly. "We did it," Alan said quietly, hardly believing it himself. Talaran placed one long-fingered hand on Alan's shoulder. "You did it, Dr. Scott. Your willingness to try a new approach has solved a problem that has troubled us for millennia." Within a year, ships throughout the galaxy were being retrofitted with the Scott-Talaran warp field modulator. Travel times between Council worlds were reduced from weeks to days. Trade flourished. Exploration boomed. When Alan and Talaran received the Council's highest scientific honor, Talaran gave a speech about the value of diverse approaches to problem-solving. Alan's speech was shorter, to the galaxy's future and to knowing when to be careful, when to be bold, and when to say, "Hold my beer." The phrase that had once caused alarm among Council species was now entering the galactic lexicon as a term for inspired, if unconventional, problem-solving. Whenever a human said those words, the galaxy no longer braced for impact. It watched with anticipation to see what impossible thing would become possible next.